Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you the top stories from India and the region. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh, and for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague Ollie Barrett in London. Good to have you with us, Ollie.
Good to be with you, Shubhendu. It's 12:30 p.m. here in London, 1:30 p.m. across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, Israel's war cabinet is dissolved, the latest from the British and the French election campaigns, and a look at Italian nuclear power. First, the headlines.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denounces tactical pauses announced by the army in Gaza fighting, also dissolves his war cabinet. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan meets his Indian counterpart Ajit Doval and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar in New Delhi, focus on bilateral, regional and global issues. India celebrates Eid-ul-Adha with prayers and festivities. President Draupadi Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi extend greetings. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli army continue to spar over the Gaza strategy. In the latest, Netanyahu has denounced the army's plan to hold daily pauses in the fighting along one of the main entries into Gaza to facilitate aid delivery. He called the daily 11-hour humanitarian pause unacceptable, while the military clarified that normal operations would continue in Rafah. Last week, former General Benny Gantz quit the government, accusing Netanyahu of having no effective post-conflict strategy in Gaza. The latest coming in from Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dissolved the 6-member war cabinet, an Israeli official informed on Monday. This was widely expected move after the departure from government of the centrist former General Benny Gantz. Netanyahu had faced demands from nationalist religious partners in his coalition, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, to be included in the war cabinet. Meanwhile, as fighting in Gaza continues, conflict across Israel-Lebanon border is now threatening to spiral into a wider war, as near-daily exchanges of fire between Israeli forces and the Hezbollah militia have escalated. A dense cloud of smoke was seen rising over the hilly frontier in southern Lebanon on Sunday. Last week, Hezbollah launched the largest volley of rockets and drones yet. In the 8 months it has been exchanging fire with the Israeli military in parallel with the Gaza war. The US and France are working on a negotiated settlement on the hostilities along Lebanon's southern border. Hezbollah says that it will not halt fire unless Israel stops its military offensive in Gaza. For its part, an Israeli military official said that Israel will take necessary measures to protect its civilians until security along the country's border with Lebanon is restored. Meanwhile, an advisor to the US president is traveling to Israel on Monday for meetings to avoid further escalation along the Blue Line. Israel and Lebanon. Attacks between Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon have led to worries of a deeper war across West Asia. And DD India correspondent Sarah Coates joins us live from Tel Aviv for more. Sarah, the Israeli war cabinet was responsible for overseeing the Gaza conflict. What are the implications of its dissolution?
Hello there, Shubhendu. Yes, it was set up to make these really key, really important wartime decisions and also to show unity at a time of real drama, upheaval, havoc here in Israel. But what this really shows now is just how there is so much chaos and so much disjointedness, you could say, within the Israeli government. Now, another one of the reasons that Benny Gantz and also the former Chief of Staff, Gadi Eisenkot, decided to join this very limited war cabinet was to block the far-right elements of the government from making these key wartime decisions, specifically the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and also the Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich. Now, since Gantz's departure, they have been pushing for a place on this war cabinet. So this is really being seen as a way for Netanyahu to keep them out, given that they could really further threaten Israel's international standing and also its relationship with other key allies like the United States, given that these are two ministers who are being pushing for things like the resettlement of Gaza and also for allowing no aid into the Gaza Strip. Now, Netanyahu, after this decision, came out to say that he'll now consult with a limited forum for sensitive decisions. But once again, really just goes to show what a mess the Israeli government is right now.
And Sarah, talking about differences creeping in, how do we read Prime Minister Netanyahu's apparent criticism of the tactical pause announced by the military?
Well, it really brings this spat that's been going on now between the echelon of the military and also Netanyahu out into the public. He came out yesterday after that announcement by the IDF about these tactical pauses to say that he had no idea about it. And then later on at a cabinet meeting, Benjamin Netanyahu said that this is a country with an army, not an army with a country, saying that he will have to make decisions that the top echelon of the military will not like. But certainly, once again, it really just shows how much of a mess the Israeli government is in, and really how there's really no cohesion going forward in all of this decision making. And once again, leaving more room for these far right-wing elements of the government to have their say and potentially further jeopardise Israel's international standing.
Sarah, thank you for those updates. Moving on, let's talk about the upcoming elections in the United Kingdom. Ollie Barrett is in London, gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ollie, the electoral challenge for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives seem to be getting bigger by the day.
It certainly doesn't appear to be getting any easier, Shibendu. That is clear from all of the polling. Less than 3 weeks now until election day, and 3 opinion polls released over the weekend predicted a near wipeout for the Conservatives. One pollster warning of an electoral extinction in the elections on July the 4th. Sunak's leadership has been racked with difficulties, and the Prime Minister's sudden decision to announce elections was met with mixed reactions and an exodus of Conservative MPs. One of the polls, published by the Sunday Times, is predicting the Conservatives could end up with just 72 seats in the 650-member House of Commons. That would be the lowest in their nearly 200-year history. Labour, according to that same poll, would win 456 seats. Well, DD India's Stuart Smith is joining me live now from London. Stuart, how worrying is the latest polling for the governing Conservatives?
Well, even senior Conservative figures have admitted that the likelihood of this election is not that it would go in their favour. And so in terms of worry, this doesn't add anything in terms of their hopes that things were going to lead to a victory for the Conservative Party, but it does, as you suggest, provide further embarrassing data that suggests that the Conservative Party is heading for what's potentially a historic defeat, with one of those polls suggesting indeed the lowest result in their 200-year history when it comes to seats. One of the other polls that took place over the weekend and cast more information about the way things are heading 3 weeks into this general election campaign is that the Labour Party has increased its support, so 2 percentage points more since polling 5 days before then, and in terms of the Conservatives, 4 percentage points worse than the poll conducted 5 days before. So only going in the wrong direction for the Conservative Party, meaning any hope of trying to change the trajectory in these last 2.5 weeks of campaigning is ever fading away ever faster. Now, if the Labour Party does manage to achieve that 25% percentage point lead, as predicted by one of the polls. That would be a lead not seen since the short-lived Prime Minister Liz Truss. And in terms of support for the Conservative Party, that would be at its lowest since the dying days of Theresa May's premiership in 2019.
And Stuart, what is Labour saying about relations with the European Union if it wins the election?
Well, largely the Labour Party has attempted to try to avoid talking about the controversial issue of Brexit. It has said, though, that it would not seek to rejoin the European Union, the single market or the customs union, and not make any major changes to Brexit. But after an interview with the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, there was a bit more detail about what Labour would do, and it suggests some changes could be coming. For example, the Labour Party says it would try to improve elements of cooperation with the European Union, would try to improve on the UK's trade deal with the European Union. That could be small things like joining up chemical regulations or the mutual recognition of professional qualifications. Tinkering, Labour suggests, to try to improve the situation. But one of the people at the forefront of Brexit negotiations when they were taking place, David Frost, who was a member of Parliament for the Conservative Party, has suggested, except for free movement, people didn't vote against any single subset of single market rules. He said they voted against having the rules set in Brussels at all. So even tinkering, getting the Labour Party into hot water with those that are still passionate about the Brexit project.
Stuart Smith, thank you. European Union countries have approved a flagship policy to restore damaged nature after months of delay, making it the first green law to pass since European Parliament elections this month. The nature restoration law is among the EU's biggest environmental policies, requiring member states to introduce measures restoring nature on a fifth of their land and sea by 2030. EU countries' environment ministers backed the policy at a meeting in Luxembourg, meaning it can now pass into law. The vote was held after Austria's environment minister, Leonor Gewessler of the Greens, defied her Conservative coalition partners by pledging to back the policy, giving it just enough support to pass.
Today is a decisive day for Europe. It's a decisive day for nature and our planet in Europe. Environment ministers meet in Luxembourg today to discuss and hopefully adopt the nature restoration law. But I'm deeply convinced that today is the day for action and that today is the time to adopt the nature restoration legislation. That's why Austria will support the law in today's vote in the Council.
The French election campaign has officially started on Monday for snap polls called by President Macron to combat the far right. Macron unexpectedly called the election after his centrist alliance was defeated by the right-wing National Rally in European Parliament elections. Le Pen's Eurosceptic National Rally is leading in opinion polls, while France's left-wing parties have formed a new alliance to fight the election. Meanwhile, France is planning to try and restrict children's access to social media. The country's president says young people are at risk from harm online. Emmanuel Macron has asked a commission of experts to examine the risks to children of spending too much time on screens, and they have recommendations for a new legislation. Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
From social media to online gaming and watching videos, screens now dominate a large part of our lives. But it's the impact on children's development that is worrying the French government. In a major speech last month, the French president said that the legal age for using social media should be no younger than 15.
And today, for several hours a day, we open the door to the jungle. And that same person could be a victim of cyberbullying, or subject to pornographic material, or pedocriminality. That's what the online space is, because it's not regulated, and it is not moderated either.
In April, a survey by French public health authorities showed that 2-year-olds in France spend about an hour a day in front of a screen. For child psychiatrist Anne Sinikier, it's a problem that must be addressed.
These screens are a bit hypnotic for children. There is lots of light, movement, bright colors, lots of sound. I mean, just look at a child watching TV. You can call them 100 times, and they won't respond in any way because they are completely hypnotized.
In 2023, the government said it wanted to introduce prevention messages on computers, tablets and phones to advise consumers in a similar way to the warnings on tobacco products. And protecting young people from too much screen time has cross-party support. Earlier this year, the opposition Republican Party tabled a bill calling for a ban on screens in nurseries for children under 3.
Some of the new laws could include no screens for the under 3s, smartphones only being allowed for those under the age of 13, and a recommendation not to use Instagram or TikTok if you're under the age of 18. Ross Cullen in Paris, reporting for DD India.
An Italian nuclear energy firm is hoping to build 20 mini reactors here in the UK. The company Nucleo has signed a partnership to work on a so-called fourth-generation nuclear reactor, while countries such as France are trying to expand their already extensive nuclear power capacity. Italy is the only G7 member that doesn't have a single operational nuclear plant. Giles Gibson reports from Rome.
This is the Lakeside Research Centre where scientists are trying to push Italy back into the nuclear age. Private company Nucleo has partnered up with Enea, the Italian government's research agency, to develop smaller fourth-generation nuclear power plants. Instead of using water, the reactors are cooled with liquid lead, which researchers say is much more efficient.
Fourth-generation reactors have another objective: close the fuel cycle. That's why they changed from a water coolant to a liquid metal coolant, sodium or lead. And in this way you can use all the compressed fuel to make an entire reactor charge. It therefore becomes convenient because it doesn't waste fuel, but it reprocesses it and puts it back into circulation. So the goal of the fourth generation is this, while maintaining the safety standards of the third generation.
Italy started building nuclear power plants in the early 1960s, but after a couple of decades, they became politically radioactive.
In 1987, just a year after the Chernobyl disaster, the Italian government held a referendum on nuclear power. And while citizens weren't actually asked whether they wanted to ban it outright, the results led to the final nuclear power station in Italy closing its doors in 1990.
In 2009, the government at the time started looking into building new plants, but the Fukushima disaster in Japan was just around the corner. Another referendum in 2011, in the wake of Fukushima, put a stop to the government's plans. Today, nuclear scientists say the public needs to be educated about this new generation of plants.
From the physical point of view, in principle, a fourth-generation reactor is not very different from previous reactors, because the type of nuclear reaction that takes place inside of them is exactly the same. The difference is in the technological solutions adopted. So rather than a different way of working, from the operational point of view, we talk about new, advanced, safer technological solutions.
While supporters of nuclear power say it could play a key part in decarbonising major economies, environmental groups say it produces huge amounts of toxic waste. While Italy's energy mix is still heavily reliant on natural gas, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's government has been laying the groundwork in Parliament for nuclear power to potentially be switched back on. But even the researchers themselves admit it could be a decade before the first new plant comes online. Giles Gibson in Rome, reporting for DD India.
And keeping the lights on for the rest of this bulletin, back to Shibendu.
Thank you for joining us. And still to come on DD India Global. Kremlin says Swiss peace conference showed futility of talks without Russia. Australia raises concerns over human rights in China with visiting Chinese Premier Li Qiang.
voice of a rising aspirational world. Stories of challenges, struggles and accomplishment. A world battling conflict, hunger and poverty. Embracing growth, development, science and technology. A voice of progress, a voice of unity. Watch Voice of the Global South with me, Akshay Dongre, only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. The Kremlin has said on Monday that Swiss conference on the Ukraine crisis had negligible results and showed the futility of holding talks without Russia. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said results of the meeting were close to zero. He further added Russia remains open to dialogue with all countries that intend to conduct it. It has also said that the conference provided Ukraine with a chance to showcase the support from Western allies. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese raised concerns over human rights in China, the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Pacific in a meeting with Chinese Premier Li Qiang in Canberra. The case of China-born Australian writer Yang Hejun, who was handed a suspended death sentence by a Beijing court, was also raised during the meet. The visit by Li marks a thaw in ties between the two nations after tensions erupted over Beijing blocking $20 billion in Australian exports and friction over defence encounters. A broad range of bilateral, regional and global issues were discussed as Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar held talks with US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in New Delhi on Monday. Jaishankar said he was confident that India-US strategic partnership will continue to advance strongly under Modi 3.0 government. This is the first trip to India by a senior American official after NDA government led by Prime Minister Modi returned to power. Earlier, US NSA met his Indian counterpart Ajit Doval. The duo reviewed progress on the India-US initiative on critical and emerging technologies. Sullivan also is expected to call on Prime Minister Modi. At least 9 people were killed, over a dozen injured in a train accident when a passenger train, Kanchenjunga Express, was hit by a goods train at Darjeeling in India's eastern state of West Bengal. The Kanchenjunga Express train, which links the northeastern Indian states of Assam and Tripura with West Bengal, was hit by a goods train. The rescue operations are nearing the final phase and all necessary measures are being taken by the central government in collaboration with state government and the Darjeeling district administration to ensure evacuation of all injured at the earliest. Union Minister for Railways Ashwini Vaishnav has announced enhanced ex gratia compensation for the victims, 1 million in case of deaths and 250,000 towards grievously injured and 50,000 for minor injuries. The railway minister also took a ride on a motorbike to reach the accident spot. Speaking to the media, the minister said the focus is now on rescue and restoration and this is not a time for politics.
ये पॉलिटिक्स का समय नहीं है, अभी सारा फोकस होना चाहिए रेस्क्यू और रेस्टोरेशन पे। पैसेंजर सेफ्टी के लिए बहुत बड़ा फोकस है, कंप्लीट फोकस है, जैसा आप स्वयं जानते भी हैं। मैं इसके बारे में बाद में डिटेल में चर्चा करूंगा। अभी मैं जरा पहले रेस्क्यू और रेस्टोरेशन ऑपरेशन का पूरा जायजा ले लूं और उसके बाद में पेशेंट से मिलने जाऊंगा।
And now to all the updates on the International Day of Yoga, which will be celebrated on 21st of June. On the occasion of International Yoga Day on June 21st, Indian High Commission in London held Yoga for All program at the iconic Trafalgar Square in the British capital. On this day, the Indian deaf cricket team, which came to England to play the T20, was invited for a yoga program. Our correspondent Sharad Mudgal spoke to Vikram Doraiswamy, Indian High Commissioner in London, and members of the Indian community in England about the program and the series between India and England.
दिव्यांग क्रिकेट टीम को खास तौर से लंदन में स्वागत करते हैं और उम्मीद करेंगे कि हमारी टीम जो है यहाँ आके अच्छा मैच का प्रदर्शन करेंगे और हमारे ब्रिटेन के दोस्तों के साथ और गहरा संपर्क बनाएंगे ताकि आगे जाके हमारी जो रिश्ता है ब्रिटेन के साथ और भी घनिष्ठ होगी, मैत्री बढ़ेगी और उसके साथ साथ क्रिकेट का जोश और आनंद पूरी दुनिया में और फैले। क्रिकेट
As part of the Yoga Mahotsav organized by High Commission of India and Sri Lanka, yoga session was conducted at 2,300-year-old sacred Bodhi tree, Jayashree Mahabodhi. The tree is believed to have been taken from India to Sri Lanka by the daughter of Emperor Asoka, Princess Sanghamitta. In addition, events also were organized on the theme Yoga for Humanity at Gandhi Park in Patikaloa and Sigiriya Central College. The events were supported by the Art of Living Foundation and Brahma Kumari's group. Let's now turn to other stories making news around the world. Residents of Hanoi are excited to welcome Russian President Vladimir Putin. Looking forward to his arrival to the Southeast Asian nation, residents expressed their feelings about Putin and his revival of Russia to being a superpower once again. The theatre workshop at Korydallos prison is nothing less than freedom from the misery of prison life. For the residents, the prisoners enacted the play Antigone, written by Greek tragedian Sophocles, that resonated with the current situation a lot. Surprising fans and art enthusiasts, Hamburg, one of the host cities of Euro 2024 Championship, hosted a soccer-themed opera where classical singers performed soccer anthems with fans chanting alongside. Fans enjoyed the opera, which was a perfect mix of various genres. That's all for this edition of DD India Live and Global. Let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan this QR code on your screens to download now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Global. Namaskar.